This week, joining us on the rocks, we have my good friend Alex Michshenko, the head of U.S. operations of Kazatomprom. Alex has over 17 years of experience in nuclear energy market analysis, non-standard material processing, intergovernmental projects, and he has a thorough knowledge of mining and processing in Central Asia, Ukraine, Central Europe, and North America. On this podcast, Alex and I talk about all things uranium. We cover Uranium 101, we debunk some uranium myths. You'll be shocked to know he does not glow in the dark. And we also cover mining in Central Asia and how that connects with green energy, national security, and more. Grab a glass of Talisker Distillers Edition or Blanton's, and let's jump in. All right, well, Alex, thank you so much for coming here on the rocks today. Cheers to having drinks with friends.
Cheers, Emily.
Working hours. Yeah.
Indeed.
So what are you?
Thanks for having me.
What are you drinking today?
The libation of choice is a rare Talisker Distillers Edition from the Isle of Skye. I know you're a bourbon girl, but for a Scotch drinker myself, it doesn't get any better if you're into peaty variety of Scotches. The Distillers Edition is just perfectly matured, and it is peaty and smooth at the same time.
I always love a cocktail that tastes like dirt. Well, that's the way to a geologist's heart.
Stop it.
Well,
what is your libation of choice, pray tell?
I'm not nearly as creative, but a good friend of mine, Pippa, if she's listening, sent me a bottle of Blanton's this week as a belated birthday gift. So I am drinking
that's
Blanton's,
spectacular.
Which is great. And I just think, talk about a whiskey that's gone from kind of something you could get at like every liquor store a few years ago, right? I mean, Blanton's was kind of a standard to now it's like a big deal to even just find a bottle. So grateful for her for sending that present. And they do have the cutest little horse stopper things, right? Which is an important thing.
That's a very pretty bottle, yeah.
Selection, yeah.
I hope it tastes as good as it looks.
It does. It's always a great bottle. Well, so I'm excited to have you on here because you've got a really unique background in the kind of mining industry. And so tell us just a little bit about how you ended up here.
Yeah, thrilled to be here, Glenn. Thanks. What have you done with your life to end up in this situation? Where do I start? 17 years in the industry, and I started by assisting in construction of uranium mines and largely helping out one of the top producers in the world, Cameco Corporation, to expand their operations into Central Asian region in the time when they were establishing their joint venture operations with the largest producer in the world, National Atomic Company, Kazatomprom. So I helped them with their footing and establishing of local infrastructure for what later became one of the better operating uranium extraction facilities in Central Asia. And over time, gradually moved through the management levels, having worked for Kazatomprom themselves and a number of trading companies that traditionally strongly represented businesses in Central Asia, connecting them to the rest of the world. And after certain positive developments in my personal life, my wife and I moved to Virginia, where I did industry consulting for a number of years until on my second run with Kazatomprom, I landed the current position that I'm occupying, that is Director of U.S. Operations for the largest producer of natural uranium concentrates.
So I love this also because I'm a huge Central Asia fan, which sounds like that's probably a weird thing to be a fan of. But I feel like when we think about the mining industry, most people think Canada, Australia, the US, maybe parts of Africa, but folks aren't aware of what a huge presence Central Asia has in certain parts of the industry and certainly a growing presence. I mean, Central Asia is hugely important to where the industry is going here in the future.
You're absolutely right. I think Central Asia holds the key to unlocking many challenging situations arising before Western producers these days. It is a very vast region with absolutely extraordinary list of geological richness and mineral resources to offer to the global community. It's also a region with a very capable and very robust infrastructure and professional backgrounds.
Yeah.
We prefer sadly, in my opinion, to think of the region as the former vestige of the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth is that these are self-sufficient, self-governing nations with their own vision and their own opinions about where they want to see themselves in the geopolitics of the 21st century. And that is the one of the most untapped resources politically and geologically, in my opinion, that is existing out there.
Yeah, I mean, from certainly those who listen to this podcast have heard me talk a lot about my Afghanistan experience, but a country
Now,
I was really impressed with was Uzbekistan. I haven't yet been to Kazakhstan, but they're all so unique. The geology is hugely untapped, essentially. I mean, there are a few big companies there for sure, but the structures you're talking about and the potential mines that can be built in that region are just massive compared to a lot of other parts of the world that have been really explored. And it's really interesting geology with folks that are knowledgeable about the mining industry and still supportive of the mining industry, right? Like they want mining companies to come in and build mines and produce.
you're right. I think I would put Central Asia in the same category with certain African regions,
Mm-hmm.
in that the potential for mining is there.
Yeah.
And the mine base has been pretty widely explored by the previous generations. The nations have not taken active steps towards actively commercially developing these resources. So over time, what they need is expertise and international financing.
Mm-hmm.
And that opens them up to the most competitive tiered extraction methods available to the industry,
Yeah.
where there's a difference between the existing mine that has seasoned operators that like to stick to their tried and true technology, and yet there are daring individuals out there and companies that are willing to take on the opportunities to adopt the top leading technology of the time.
Yeah.
And I think that puts Central Asia exactly at the top and center of this new upcoming revolution of new emerging mining opportunities.
Alex, give me a little bit of an overview of the uranium market and how it works, because I think most folks don't really understand how it might be different from other commodities. And certainly, I don't think most people understand that there's a difference between uranium, the mineral, and uranium as it's converted into nuclear fuel. I think folks think like you pull it out of the ground and then it gets made into bombs. And that's really,
Yeah.
I would assume that's not actually how it works.
Counter to prevailing industry's opinion, I do not glow in the dark. And despite the fact that I lost most of my hair, that is largely due to genetics and not professionally related factors.
Yeah.
But you're right. I think perhaps uranium is the most misunderstood and underrepresented in terms of publicly covered commodity element out there. And there's reason for that, because for a number of decades, this has been exclusively a government-centered element that played a pivotal role in defense,
Mm-hmm.
in a country's energy policies, but also policies that spilled over into the military use.
Mm-hmm.
So, with respect to educating the public about the properties of uranium as a chemical element, its use in the civil and non-military applications for the nuclear energy community, and stages that material, as you rightly point out, has to go through from being just a chemical element extracted from the ground to when it becomes a nuclear fuel are multiple. And I don't think we as an industry, sadly, are talking enough about these exciting and invigorating stages. We can talk about the possible gaps and wish lists of a lot of folks in the industry that wish that we would employ communication with the public in a little bit more robust and engaging way. But suffice it to say that we're not doing enough right now, sadly.
So, for example, like uranium that's coming out of Kazakhstan, does most of it go to energy? I would assume the amount that goes to energy is a much larger percentage, or other industrial purposes, than anything that's national security related.
That's correct. Natural uranium concentrates broadly are marketed for civilian use and civilian non-military application.
Mm-hmm.
There are certain programs on the Department of Defense side that cater to the needs of certain governments, but you will find that material that is produced is typically funneled through commercial means and finds its way to utilities, that is, end users of natural uranium in the form of nuclear fuel through series of intermediaries. There's a lot of things that the material needs to undergo in order to find itself inside the nuclear reactor. But obviously, the material that is mined and marketed from Kazakhstan, like in any other cases, is committed to the end users, particularly within the countries that have very robust nuclear policies, such as the United States. We have the largest nuclear fleet on the planet. China, Japan, up to a certain point before Fukushima sad events had occurred. Western Europe and bits of South America.
And when you say nuclear fleet, you mean nuclear power plants?
Nuclear power plants, correct.
Clear. Yeah. So I think folks, there's been a lot of discussion about should nuclear energy be considered a green energy solution? Do you have an opinion on that?
I think the documents speak louder than words, and the current bill that is hopefully successfully passing through the Congress right now is a living proof of the government taking a very hard and detailed look into reassessing the role of nuclear in the clean energy bills and initiatives. I don't know to what extent you're familiar with the contents of the current initiative that is basically tailored to lower the inflationary results of pretty turbulent couple of years that we've had. But nuclear is a very important part of that initiative, and along with solar and wind, it occupies a very confident place in the zero emission green energy sector.
So are there in other areas like Europe or other parts of the world, are they looking to build more nuclear power plants? Or is it something that's kind of on the upward trajectory, or is there still a huge amount of resistance to it?
Very oddly, what you find is certain nations voting along the party line in terms of institutional or historical preferences of certain politicians.
Yeah.
You find very robust initiatives on part of some European countries, such as the United Kingdom. Belgium is making the right sounds towards revitalizing and actually rebuilding their nuclear fleet. And a number of other countries in Europe, emerging countries that would like to get into nuclear game, Poland and Central European nations. But at the same time, you see folks like Germany who are finding themselves in a rut, don't they?
Yeah.
With once overperforming infrastructure that allowed them to be one of the champions of nuclear energy in the entire European Union sphere, and largely walking back every single project in that realm and phasing out existing nuclear power plants throughout the nation right now. So it's a mixed bag of opinions, but I think the overall tone that we see in Europe is that of a pro-nuclear vision, even to the extent that European Union classifying it just like we do and putting it in the category of green energy sources and coming up with series of solutions and regulatory incentives that would allow nuclear to prosper and see as few barriers as possible on the path towards it.
So what do you see in terms of the impact that those decisions or preferences have on the mining side of the house? Because if those clearly, the utilities are the customers, and if the demand is fluctuating greatly based off of politics, essentially, what do you see happening in terms of the actual exploration and mining companies that focus on uranium?
I think mining is tricky. It's simple and tricky at the same time. And let me explain why. It's simple in that we largely know where some of the most better performing uranium mines are located. We know them by geography. We know them by company performing those geological explorations and extractions. And we know the historical distribution of committed material throughout the world and where those pounds end up and in which nuclear power plants. But at the same time, there's a will that is demonstrated by certain nations wanting to look into uranium mining operations once again, maybe reassessing their ability to extract at this point in in our geological state of engineering and where the price is, particularly for the material. So it is very encouraging, and even the largest producers admit to it, that new mining companies and new nations that have an inventory or a resource base that allows them to look into mining potential down the road are trying to get into the game. Now, it's a very long and difficult road in assessing the risks and getting the investors involved and waiting for the right price combination that allows for more risky and industry intense projects to come online.
Yeah.
But the desire is there. And because we think that there is the lifting all boats effect that is targeting everybody within the industry, and with the growing demand that is going to be hitting the industry in the next, some anticipate 10 to 15 years, there will be room for everybody to perform.
I find that to be a great opportunity for folks to think about, because even if you're a fan of green energy and this new wave, I think most folks would be surprised to know, for example, that the company you work with and for is publicly traded.
Correct.
Right. Like I think folks hear, uranium company, Central Asia, and not to say it's just your company, but I think they expect them to all be state owned and government controlled. And there's no way to kind of participate in the potential upside of what this may look like for the uranium industry. Do you want to combat any of those preconceived notions?
No, you're right, Emily. And I think that stems from what we talked about a bit earlier, that largely the institutional memory of that region seems to prevail that, hey, this is the former, backyard of the Soviet Empire. And by definition, then, they would like to extrapolate that old mentality onto how they operate their companies. Not so for Kazakhstan, and for a couple of reasons. Number one, I will remind our viewers that Kazakhstan was the first post-Soviet nation that voluntarily walked away from the nuclear weapons arsenal in early 90s, thus demonstrating to the global nuclear community that they would like to stick to the trajectory of peaceful use of nuclear atom and largely phase out and walk away from the militarization of the subject. And Kazatomprom, as a company now, just celebrated 25 years of operations, which is a remarkable achievement and a testimony to over 20,000 individuals working tirelessly to achieve new heights and commit themselves to absolutely unique and humbling mining operations in the middle of Central Asia. But Kazatomprom from the beginning had a completely different view, in that they realized the potential that the resource base that they had contained in itself. And instead of going it alone and sticking to that old Soviet-inspired methodology of nationalizing the company.
Yeah, and like totally vertically integrated, you do everything. Yeah.
Correct. The business went the other way. And, in conjunction with a number of agencies within the government of Kazakhstan, they opened up to competitive bidding, and they opened their doors to every top producer in the world. I'll remind you that Kazakhstan, under the leadership of Kazatomprom, is home to some of the most remarkable joint mining operations in the industry. They mine uranium jointly with Cameco, the top Canadian producer of uranium, with the Japanese, a series of Japanese companies that brought each their absolutely individual and tailored approach to how they extract the material, how they process it, how they market it, how they package it, and so forth. France, Orano, one of the top performers in the industry historically, has a very successful operation in Kazakhstan. The Chinese producers, even Russia, they all found home in the country, and they found common ground with Kazatomprom as a national operator to exchange their experiences and offer something that was uniquely theirs to the industry. So the end result was basically 6 different approaches of how to mine the material, how to process it, how to store it, how to manage the day-to-day routine of a mining operation. And that gave the national operator, Kazatomprom, just absolutely unique angle and experience in how similar things are done and approached globally.
Yeah.
So that is truly a tribute to the visionary approach to conducting business and keeping it open
Mm.
and transparent with the rest of the world. And you are correct in stating that Kazatomprom has been publicly traded since 2018.
Mhm.
The company is trading on London Stock Exchange, and there are plans to go beyond that in the near future. So yes, that is another testimony to keeping things transparent and inspiring for everybody else to follow.
I certainly know that when I was really actively working in the region, I mean, Kazakhstan was who we pointed to, right? Like if you run an open process according to kind of best practices, this is what your mining industry can look like, right? I mean, it really is the gold standard in the region for attracting foreign direct investment and really good partners. And I would say from my exposure to it, because of all of those different groups that have been successful in Kazakhstan, it's led to a very unique Kazakh way of doing business, right? Because they've kind of been able to blend what's worked well for Kazakhstan from those different models to come up with something that really works uniquely for the people and the government.
That's absolutely right. And I think what further solidifies that unique Kazakh experience is the terms, is the length of cooperation. Companies, in
Mm-hmm.
other words, don't just simply come in, share their business, and cut ties with the indigenous company. No, they're here to
Yeah.
stay, and they continue to operate for decades, Emily. And the fact that Kazakhstan as a nation entered into this race very early on in the 90s gave them that competitive lead that permeates to this day. And you're right. It's home to so many operators, not just in the uranium field, but oil and gas and lithium. You name it. Just rare earth metals scene alone is pretty diverse and extraordinary.
Yeah, no, and I think it's just so cool because I know a lot of people, especially Americans, not to knock on us, fellow American listeners, but we're not typically great with geography, right? And folks kind of lump all the stands together, right?
Yep.
And as you mentioned earlier, Kazakhstan is very different and unique from the other countries in the region, and I think it's really impressive what's been done really of their own, again, their own initiative early on, set this path out. So I think it's really cool. And I love to have folks like you share your experiences from working in these other regions because, again, things are done really well in places other than just the US, Canada, or in Australia. And we can learn a lot from that, right? As we look at companies expanding into emerging and frontier markets, like what's worked well in Kazakhstan that can be applied to countries that are maybe only now starting to see foreign direct investment in the mining space, right? I think there's some great lessons learned there. It's not turning everything into Toronto, right? Sometimes there's a better model. Not that
No,
I,
you're absolutely right.
yeah,
No, not that there's nothing wrong with that. You are correct, and I think one other thing that folks out there fail to realize is how strongly positioned Kazakhstan is within the political spectrum of the region, in that they were able to pivot on so many challenging situations this year alone, Emily, to consider alternative delivery routes for commitment
yeah,
that they have with global customer base to deliver their resources to the doorstep of every customer in Europe, North America, and beyond. So
yeah,
they're incredibly well positioned in terms of their traditional angled politics that is equal to all, but they also have these companies that, despite being national operators, are publicly traded and have these resources to communicate equally well with the government sector as well as with the private sector, and find that unique position to negotiate and carve out the opportunities to keep the goods flowing, if you will, during the hardest of circumstances.
yeah. No, that's really important. I mean, you must see lots of lessons learned that could be applied maybe here in the US and North America during the crazy supply chain stuff we've had going on. Is there something you think we could learn from them in that sense?
I think it's teamwork. We've been traditionally strong as an industry to do that. Folks historically concentrated on the commonalities that we have within our businesses rather than on differences.
Yeah.
That You see that permeate throughout the dialogue all the time. And because everybody essentially has a stake in the game in Kazakhstan, it ceases being just the Kazakhstan problem. Mm-hmm. It's a solution towards which everybody's working each in their own way. Kazakhstan happens to be sort of the tip of the spear, if you will, in having these negotiations to diversify their delivery commitments and routes by which those commitments are fulfilled. But every single partner within the uranium sector and beyond is contributing as well, because it takes a global effort to talk to your governments to make sure that those materials and those geographies are properly explained, because there's a lot of risk mitigation that needs to be factored in. And a lot of folks that are, like you rightly pointed out earlier, are not necessarily familiar with the geographical peculiarities of the region, mm-hmm. right? And it's hard to force folks to distinguish certain countries and their internal objectives and their motivating factors. And there's a lot of conversation and back and forth that needs to happen to open certain eyes and ears to make it a truly global effort. I'm very encouraged by a lot of positive steps that are being made by the current administration in that regard. I think we're performing sending a lot of proper signals to the industry, to other governments, but we can do more, and we should be doing more.
Hey, one step in front of the other. It's always a good place to start, though. So that's
correct.
Good here. Well, and on that note, we've had a few worldview points here. So I like to ask all my guests as the last question, if you could wave your magic wand and change one thing about the mining industry, what would you change overnight?
The magic wand. Consider me having waved one.
Yeah.
One thing is, nuclear industry is not boring. That is the message that I will continue to carry with me to my well-deserved retirement. Mm-hmm. Paraphrasing one of my dearest colleagues in the industry, I would rather be criticized and bullied by my peers within the industry than by the naysayers on the anti-nuclear side. Mm-hmm. And there's a reason for that, Emily, because we're unique in the sense that we choose this profession for the majority of our lives. Mm-hmm. And there are very few folks that come in, do their time, and then move on to other projects. We right. usually like to stick around, and you may find us in the next mining season representing a different business, but it would be a business very tightly related to the industry at large. Mm-hmm. So we're not boring because this is our boiling pot. We have just an extraordinary combination of thoughtful, resilient, talented, inspired, tireless, optimistic, and charismatic folks within the industry. And that is an untapped resource that we need to invigorate, because conversation about the safety, reliability, responsibility, and dependability of the nuclear mm-hmm. industry needs to be projected and communicated. And that needs to be done in a very engaging, casual, charismatic, and fun way. We're in dire search of a spokesperson who would do all that and then some. And I think that would be the ultimate tribute to the great work that the folks within the industry are doing day in and day out.
Maybe you need a podcast. I'm going to kick it off. There you go. Yeah. No, I think that's so true. I mean, I certainly can appreciate it's true about the uranium space or the nuclear energy space, but I think it can also be applied to the industry as a whole. Right? I always say we have really fun people that work in mining, and we have crazy stories. We didn't get into a lot of them, but you and I have shared some of ours over a drink, at mining conferences here and there. I mean, you have wonderful adventures, and you have folks that are so passionate about what we do, because it is really interesting. We all kind of geek out about our own little slice. So I can certainly appreciate that. And on the nuclear energy side, I mean, gosh, the fact that folks don't even realize how important it is to our economy, right? I mean, it's something that doesn't get talked about enough. I absolutely agree. So again, I think you need to start your own podcast. Get the word out there a little bit more.
Here's hoping.
So cheers to that. Thanks again for coming, Alex.
Emily, it's my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.